Hey everyone! Today we're going to talk about how to push data from Spreadsheet to Slack real time. So, our final product should look like something like this. I'm going to give you a minute to kind of see what's going on here. So, every time a value changes on the spreadsheet, that sends a message on a certain Slack channel, kind of alerting everyone that there is an update on the spreadsheet. Obviously, this is just a use case for this specific tutorial, but there's so much that you can do once you get, the basics or the hang of it. All right, so to start, I recommend having this article pulled up on your browser. Just so you can follow me here, we will be discussing or we will be referencing multiple documentations, and I have the links here. This way, if you have this pulled up, you can easily follow all the links that I will be opening. Yeah, so to start, right? So to start, we need to make a couple of decision points and just get this out of the way. So one, we will need to to create a Slack application, right? So the way it will go is we need an application to post messages on the Slack channels that we choose or we want to post, to alert everyone that new messages or new values on the spreadsheets have been created, or a new row has been added, or a new response was added via the Google form, right? Because we can connect Google Forms and spreadsheets. So we need to come up with a name for our Slack application. The second thing that we need to decide on is like, what do we want to set as the trigger, right? So do we want to trigger a posting of a message whenever, just like in this example, whenever someone changes a value in a spreadsheet? Or do we want to, not necessarily every time a value changes, but like maybe set it up such that every time a new row is added, a message get posted? Or we can also go the route of scheduling it according to a specific time. So we can definitely choose different kinds of triggers, and we will go over some examples of that. We will have to do that on over at the Google spreadsheet setting later. You'll see. And then of course, what message do we want to send, right? Who do we want to tag? Do we want to add emojis, add links, etc.? So the good thing about Slack's API is that it enables us to send, to have the flexibility to send whatever message, whatever emoji, whatever links we want to send. So that's really cool. And then of course, what channel do we want to send it to, right? So where is your team at? Who do you want to alert, right? And the cool thing is you can also set this up such that it only goes to a specific person. Cool. So the first step is to create your own app in Slack. So in order to do that, we need to make sure that we're signed into a Slack workspace. So I created a dummy Slack workspace for this tutorial. Let's open it up real quick, and this second one. All right, so we are logged into a Slack workspace here. Second one is to go to this link. All right, and this should route us to a page that will allow us to create apps. And as you can see, I've kind of like played with a couple here already. So let's just create an app. This is the step-by-step is like really here, right? So I wrote this such that you won't need a video in order to create your own Slack application, but I think the video kind of like really helps visualize everything. So I'm just gonna go through it. We need to give it a name. So say for example, I'm just gonna say like, this is for YouTube. I'm really bad at inventing names. And then I'm gonna add it to my workspace. So I have a couple of Slack workspaces. I'm just gonna add it here on marsescabine.slack.com. That is a dummy Slack workspace. Let's add it there. Once we are here, right, so we will see this section here where we can add features and functionality. So I'm gonna click on incoming webhooks, and then once I'm there, I just need to make sure there's going to be a toggle here that toggle is on. So what we want to make sure, or what we want to choose, is the activate incoming webhooks selection. So let's toggle that up, and from there we can see this section here where we can add a webhook to a specific channel. So now it's asking me, where do you want to send messages to, or which channel do you want to connect your Slack application that's going to send messages every time there's a trigger on Spreadsheet. And there's 3 ready channels here. I'm just going to add it here on the integration channel. And there you go. So what you want to look out for is this link here. That is basically your webhook, and we will use that to connect everything together, Google Spreadsheet and Slack. All right, so now that we have a webhook key, which is basically a URL or a link, we just need to copy that and go to our tutorial here and see what the next steps are, right? So first step to integrate everything together, or to connect Google Sheets and Slack, is to pull up a Google Sheets here and open up its script editor. So I have one pulled up here. If you don't know where the script editor here, that you go to tools and then you click on script editor. So this is where we will be writing our code. I'll just close that. And then the next step is to store the webhook key in a variable, right? So I'll name mine as like URL, var URL, and then I'll just paste the webhook key there. The next step is to create a function that will run when a trigger happens. So we have a function here. For the sake of like this two being the same, I think I named mine as like sample name here. So I'm just gonna copy that over. So the key thing is to remember is that this is the function that we want to run whenever a trigger happens. And a trigger can be, you know, a value changing on the spreadsheet, or a new row being added, or, you know, the clock hitting like a certain time, right? If we want to run this the script every day at 5 p.m., we can do that. And so these triggers are conventionally named are called event objects. And in Google Apps Script, which is the language that we're using to code the script, that event object is denoted as the letter E. So we'll just pass the parameter. The other thing to note is that if we want spreadsheets to connect to another host or another app, then we will need to call a class called URL fetch app. So I have the documentation open here, but you can also find the link on this post, right? So what is URL fetch app? So so if you want to fetch, basically if you want to fetch another application to interact with our spreadsheet, this is the class that we call. And under this class, it has, you know, different methods, right, to connect to another host, and we will be using its fetch method. So just, you know, some more documentation here, but the thing to remember is that fetch method can accept multiple parameters. I mean, it can accept a URL, which is kind of like the webhook connection, right, that we got, the URL that we had from Slack earlier, that will open the doorway for us to kind of like enter Slack. So it needs that parameter. And optional, you know, we can also pass in a variable. So here it's called params, right? But we can name it whatever. So what this variable means or will have is basically like a set of parameters, right? Um, that we want to pass whenever our spreadsheet connects to Slack. So our messages can be in this params variable. Um, the data from spreadsheet can be sent through this params variable. So, all right. So kind of like just talking about params more. And I'm purposely going over this documentation because I think that this is actually the, if anybody like if you're like a non-coder like me, like who started as like someone who did not know anything about code, documentations are your friends. So I kind of like really want to hammer down the importance of having this documentations open and referring to it as we go through this tutorial. All right, so just speaking about params, right? So this again is the variable, right? The variable object will specify the kind of data that we want to send using the webhook or through the webhook, right? Um, so yeah, params accepts these parameters. So basically, we can pass it values for each of these. For the sake of this tutorial, we really only need like three things here. We just need to specify the content type, right? So like what kind, yeah, the content type, and then we also need to pass to fill in the method, right? So if we're gonna send messages, we said earlier that we want to send messages to Slack from Spreadsheet, then we'd want to indicate that we're passing in a post method, right? Again, there's many options here. You can specify get, delete, patch, post, or put. I'm not gonna go over what they mean. You can Google that up. But if you want to send messages to Slack, we're going to have to specify the post method and then the payload. So this is the heart of the of the this tutorial basically. If we're going to send a message to Slack, if we're going to send data from Spreadsheet to Slack, we need to store those in a payload. Okay, so yeah, so here's the full code so far. Content type, I specified it as a JSON content. And as I mentioned earlier, the method is going to be a post method. Payload is going to be a JSON payload. And how do I know that it should be a JSON payload? I studied Slack's documentation. Just click the link real quick here. My internet is a little cooperative today, so cool. So scanning it real quick, we will see that it specifies that the message payload should be a JSON object, and that's why these documentations are super useful. All right, so the next step is to specify the payload, I think. But before that, this is how our code is looking like so far. All right, so I'm just gonna, okay, so let me go back here. Oh, for some reason, okay, so let me just retype URL fetch app. So I am actually recording clips for this video. So URL fetch app, what did I say? Fetch URL params. And I think I might have deleted the code that I had here earlier. That's why it's not here anymore. In any case, all right, so I'm just gonna specify the params that I'm actually going to pass, right? So what did we have here? I'm just gonna copy paste this. I showed you guys how I decided that these are gonna be the content of the params already. And as I said earlier, payload is the heart right, of this tutorial, because we're saying we want to send a message to Slack whenever something happens in Spreadsheet. So that message or whatever, if we want to send the data from Spreadsheet to Slack, well, we need to store that on the payload variable. All right, so let's do that. Let me see here if I mentioned anything else that is worth mentioning on the video too. Okay, so we were talking about the Slack documentation earlier, right? How do we know what data type the payload should be? It's because we read the documentation. How do we know what we can send, what we can store in the payload? We look at the Slack API documentation. So going here, it says here that there is a list of fields, fields that we can fill out whenever we're sending a payload, and we can use all of these, but for the sake of this very simple project tutorial, we're just going to use the text field. So I'm just gonna text field. Is that what I did here? All right, var payload. Yeah, I think that's what I did. Okay. So text equals, oops, and then what did I say? Okay, so text and then whatever message we want to send, right? So I'm just gonna say this is a sample message, and it should work theoretically, right? Oops. You know what? I'm not gonna, I'm just gonna copy paste this. Let's see if this works out. All right, so var payload, this is a sample text. So theoretically this should work. Let's try to actually not yet. This won't work yet because we still need to set up a trigger on Spreadsheet. All right, so this is the last step, ladies and gentlemen. We need to specify what event will run, what event needs to happen for this script to run, right? So I mentioned earlier that can be whenever someone changes the value on the spreadsheet, whenever a new row is added, etc., etc. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so it looks like I also linked a documentation here. I mentioned there's a readily available set of triggers in spreadsheets. If you open that link, you will see this, right? So readily available, meaning they're super straightforward, right? So when you open a spreadsheet, that's an event. That can be an event when someone runs, someone installs like an add-on on spreadsheet, that can also be a trigger. When someone edits a cell on the spreadsheet, that can also be a trigger. When someone changes the selection, right, like the cell that they're selected to on spreadsheet, that can also be a trigger. And there's other triggers too, but they're a little bit more, they're less straightforward. This is basically what you call simple triggers. Google Apps Script has this thing called installable triggers, if you can see here, under triggers and events, simple, and then installable triggers. And then, yeah, there's the event objects. There's the event objects section. Okay, why did I click that? Okay, cool. Once we've chosen event trigger the workflow, we can now do more, such as identify who caused the event. Yeah, so here's the cool thing. So, all right, I know I clicked that because here's the thing about triggers, right? So once we've chosen, right, what we want to trigger the function to run, let's say we want to choose this, like on edit, right? We can now go to the event objects documentation and see what kind of methods we can call, or we can have access to just by specifying a specific trigger. So when you open a spreadsheet, you can now access the user who opened that spreadsheet. So for example, you can see the Google their Gmail, their email address, right? When you choose edit, you have a little bit more of a selection here. You can see who changed the value, but you can also see what it changed to, right? So what is the new value of the cell, as well as the old value of the cell. So you now have access to all of those, which is really cool. So we want to do that, right? I think I explained it here. Okay, so like for now, before we before we're wrapping up here, we're just gonna add some more bells and whistles. So var, let's say we wanna we whenever whenever someone edits a cell on the spreadsheet, we want to send a message to Slack specifying or telling everyone that this person changed that value, and he changed it from this value to a new value, right? So we need 3 variables there. User, which we know can be called using user, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm not mistaken, that's user too, right? Right. Okay. And then var, what is the new value, right? Value. And then what was the old value? Okay. All right, so we should now have access to that, and now we can call that in this text. We can say, like user changed old value to new value. We can say that now. And then we can add, what's really interesting is we can add, like emojis. Right. Robot. I hope there's an emoji for that. All right. And that's it. I think we're now ready to deploy. Okay. All right, but before deploying, okay, so here's the part where we actually can specify the trigger. No need to code anything. We just need to go to edit, check the current the project's trigger list. There's no trigger there, that's fine. So we just need to select what function we want to associate the trigger to. So what function will need to run every time this event or this trigger happens. So I'm gonna say sample name, because that's the name of my function. And then I'm gonna select on edit. So I want this function to run, sample name, whenever someone edits the spreadsheet. Right? But as I said earlier, we can change that such that, whenever someone opens it, changes the selection, even form submit is here. And this is just for simple triggers. Like there's so much, like there's also the other kind of trigger, right? The installable trigger, etc. Anyhow, so let's save that. Check your pop-up blocker. Okay, I checked my pop-up blocker, and no surprise, it's authorization related. So I just need to authorize the application because it's not verified, but like we're not gonna go back to safety. We'll live life on the edge. So just advanced settings, allow. All right, so I think that's it. This should run. Where am I? This should run. Okay, now we need to deploy before we can test. Let's go ahead and how do I deploy? Publish. So I talked about this in my other tutorials, but make sure that you're running it under the setting. So new, always select that. Make sure that it's running under a personal Gmail, i.e. it's not running under a company Gmail, like that has a specific domain. And run it under this setting, anyone, even anonymous. All right, so now it's deployed. Ideally, whenever we make changes here, let's open the Slack, our Slack workspace to test. Excuse me. All right, so we know that it's going to go to this integration channel, right? And it looks like earlier when I added, when I connected the application to this channel, there was, this message. I didn't see that. So what we want to see is if I add any value in this cell, there should be a message on Slack from this application. Let's go ahead and do that. Test. And there you go. So this is the user, this is me. I changed undefined because there was no value in the cell earlier, but I changed it to test, and I'm trying to send a grimaging emoji there, but it's not working. So, and let's see. I was also trying to send a robot emoji, but I don't think there is a robot emoji. Okay, so now let's see. Test 1. Oh, there you go. Cool. So there you go. The user changed this value to this value emoji. If there was a robot emoji, it would have been used here, but there's none. And yeah, that's how you tie everything together. Let's see if there's any parting message here. Nada. So I hope that this tutorial is super helpful. If you guys are new, if anybody is new to webhooks and this is kind of like still confusing, I've written a couple of things about it here on Medium. I have some articles about webhooks specifically, and I have other tutorials where I connect Spreadsheet to, for example, Telegram. Yeah, so this is the other article you might want to see if using webhooks is a little new. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and good luck on your project. Bye.